All right. So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. Inshallah, today we're actually going to be continuing what we did last time, but I thought that there were some things that we had not completed in regards to the tafsir for this ayah. Okay, which is هذا كتاب أنزلناه مبارك مصدق الذي بين يديه ولتنذر القرى ومن حولها. Right? So this ayah right there. But before that, that's where we left off at. But before that, with وما قدر الله حق قدره إذ قالوا ما أنزل الله على بشر من شيء. There, we did go into the different ayat, وَمَا قَدَرُ اللَّهَ حَقَّ قَدْرِهِ, and we did talk about, I don't know if you remember, let's look at some of those notes that we had looked at. We talked about these three ayat that are in the Quran that start with the premise, وَمَا قَدَرُ اللَّهَ حَقَّ قَدْرِهِ, and we looked at in Allah قَوِيٌّ Aziz, that in order to understand the value, to understand the honor, to understand the magnificence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you gotta relate to a number of things, because the word وَمَا قَدَرُ اللَّهَ حَقَّ قَدْرِهِ, that the disbelievers do not understand, do not comprehend, do not give Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala the value, the magnificence, the honor that the Lord Almighty deserves. So we looked at these three ayat. How do we get to as believers? So we recognize that that's what the disbelievers are doing. But as believers, how can we contain, how can we embrace the honor that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala deserves? So we said, number one, Inna Allah qawiyyun aziz, understanding the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that He is Al-Qawi, that He is the Almighty, Al-Aziz, that He is not in need of people. In other words, He is self-efficient. And number two, understand that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has the whole universe, the earth, and even the whole universe in terms of skies, etc., galaxies, all in his grip. Then therefore the Lord Almighty is beyond all that. And then finally, how do we actually embrace that in practice? We embrace it by embracing what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had revealed in revelation onto the different prophets and messengers. Okay, so those are the three different things. But what is an obstacle? What can act as an obstacle from having all of this fully understood in our heart? And that's what I actually wanted to right there lay out for us to see. So when we look at understanding وَمَا قَدَرُ اللَّهَ حَقَّ قَدْرِهِ, that actually tells us that there is a meaning to it as well that we have to fully embrace. And this is the part that I actually also wanted to share because it relates to understanding. In order to fully understand Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in order to fully understand Qadarillah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there's something very important that we have to keep in mind, that there are certain things that can act as obstacles and can act as the place to, let's say, that it can prevent us from fully understanding Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you look at these ayat, Surah Al-An'am, ayah 91, Zumar 67. I actually have right there, the complete translation for you to actually see it in English, but I personally look at the Arabic side. Okay, so we look at all these ayat. This is basically the beginning of it. But those three ayat are, consider them as the prelude to understand, because the other ayat, as in Surah Al-Mutaffifin, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting us know that sin actually becomes an obstacle from fully understanding and fully comprehending قدر الله سبحانه وتعالى, the honor of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So let's say, what's the evidence on that? The evidence is Surah Al-Mutaffifin when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, كَلَّا بَلْ رَانَ عَلَى قُلُوبِهِمْ مَا كَانُوا يَكْسِبُونَ. So you could see in Surah Al-Mutaffifin, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, no, rather the stain had covered their hearts from what they used to earn. In other words, the person's behavior the person's attitude, the person's relationship with the world around them can actually act as an obstacle from the person to be able to fully comprehend, whether through the brain, intelligence, or through the heart, or through the soul, from understanding the world around them. When we say understanding the world, we're actually talking about understanding Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's magnificence and force and power, which you would actually see in this whole universe. The other thing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually had mentioned in the ayah, في قلوبهم مرض فزادهم الله مرضا. In their hearts, there is a disease which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had made it increase. Did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it increase? Or is it that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a certain rule, has a certain law in this universe that it doesn't stop for a particular person, that if you behave in a certain way that gets your heart contaminated, don't call it infected, the infection, unless you act in stopping the infection, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not change the universe or will not change the laws that He had created just for your sake. You have to stop the infection yourself, and you have to stop this contamination through your behavior. In other words, you have to act upon it, whether we're speaking about a physical contamination slash physical infection, or whether we're speaking about a heart slash spiritual infection. You have to make the change. Don't expect Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to change the things for you. Well, just like Prophet Ayyub alayhi salam, when he had made the dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would heal him and give him the healing, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, well, what you need to do is that he needed to engage in some physical fitness, and he tells him, well, what you need to do is that urkud برجلك هذا مغتسل بارد وشراب. You have to yourself put in some physical fitness, and you have to make the change. And then هذا مغتسل بارد وشراب. Here's this whether it's a potion or whether it's a medication to drink or something, but at the end there is a mughtasal. There's a certain lotion that you probably have to apply on your skin, or probably baridun wa sharab, in a certain medication that he has to drink, etc. At the end, what we see is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whether prophets or whether other than the prophets, they have to invest in making the change. You cannot just speak of success and speak of success unless you actually put in the effort to make the change. Don't expect the success to just come to you unless you wake up early, you wake up for your fajr, unless you put in the effort to seek the ilm, unless you put in the effort to memorize, to learn, to probably work on your deen, to probably start doing your fasting, to probably start maybe changing your Wi-Fi password and letting someone else have access to the internet if that's your place of weakness. You have to put in an effort. There's no way that you can get to success unless you put in the effort, and unless that becomes a consistent behavior that basically speaks of determination. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also said, وَنُقَلِّبُ أَفْئِدَتَهُمْ. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when you were speaking about al-fu'ad, I want you to look at this one. There's a difference between the word qalb and between the word fu'ad, because the word fu'ad is actually coming from the root of the root that actually means to cook something. I know, to cook something. What does it mean to cook something? But the word qalb actually comes from the root which means to flip. So when you say وَنُقَلِّبُ أَفْئِدَتَهُمْ, this is actually talking about something that takes a while to cook, a while to fully become ready in the heart. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَأَصْبَحَ فُؤَادُ أُمِّ مُوسَى فَارِغًا. What is al-fu'ad? It's basically her heart was fully cooked. Her heart was fully feeling that emptiness because it was completely shattered. It was completely cooked. When, of course, she had lost her son, or at least her son, she was worried that he might have died. But that's when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings Prophet Musa to her. So when you look at وَنُقَلِّبُ أَفْئِدَتَهُمْ, that tells us that keeping away from Iman in behavior is one main reason to why their hearts become fully cooked and fully empty of any mean to understanding Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now keep this one in mind, because if the hearts are cooked with other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's ilm, in other words, what you put in as an ingredient in your heart is basically what's going to affect the taste that you would feel on your tongue, the taste of Iman, or whether it becomes the taste of nifaq or the taste of kufr. What ingredients did you put in your heart? What are the ingredients did you expose yourself to? The ingredients are basically going to mean the things that you behaved in, the things that you looked at, the environment, the friends that you hang out around. Those are the ingredients that will later be what you will provide in your fu'ad. Il-fu'ad is basically that area that you have within your heart that completely cooks all of those different ingredients that you had provided through your eyes, through your ears, through your tongue, through your behavior, through the environment, through your friends, that area that you decided to put yourself in. Number three, the other one is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَطُبِعَ عَلَى قُلُوبِهِمْ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and their hearts were, the word is طُبِعَ. What is al-taba'? Al-taba' is to stamp something. Al-taba' is to seal with something. Al-taba' is to label something. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talked about the munafiqeen, he had actually mentioned a couple different descriptions about al-munafiqeen. He said, إِذَا رَأَيْتَهُمْ تُعْجِبُكَ أَجْسَامُهُم. When you see them, you could see they're probably very good looking. They're definitely very attractive. And يَقُولُوا تَسْمَعْ لِقَوْلِهِمْ. And when they would say things, they seem like they're influencers. They definitely know how to say very eloquent speech, and definitely they sound very influential. They sound very strong in their speech. But just because they may seem like great motivational speakers, they may seem like they are strong in their ability to have that charisma, that does not necessarily make them the right friends to surround yourself with them. That does not make them the right people to hang out with, and therefore Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had described the munafiqeen that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala فَطَبَعَ عَلَى قُلُوبِهِمْ, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that He had labeled their hearts, sealed their hearts, and they were then not capable of comprehending the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because they had been fully comprehending their own manipulation, and that they were actually manipulating their own selves, and then they had become unaware and completely unable to comprehend the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why? Because they lived in their own self-manipulation. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَطَبَعَ عَلَى قُلُوبِهِمْ, their hearts were completely sealed from bringing in any further comprehension. Now, this is very important, because guess what? Just like when we said about the il-fu'ad, that it becomes to mean something that is cooked. You know, there's one thing. If you put too much of a certain ingredient, then that ingredient that becomes the main ingredient without you realizing. Unless you have the right amount of certain ingredients, and you have the right amounts of the different things for what is inside your heart and what you surround yourself with, that actually is going to determine your identity. So if you're putting in a lot of, let's say, those friends, and those are the people that you hang out most of the times, those are the people that you hang out with most of the times, and most of your times you're basically listening to this kind of music, or you're listening to or watching these kind of reels, etc. That's going to be your identity. Your identity is going to be determined based on the ingredients, based on the quantities that you basically put in with what is in your fu'ad. And therefore, you've got this fu'ad, you've got this qalb right there. Therefore, it only has a certain amount that you could stuff things in it. It has a certain capacity. And that's why you cannot have a person that wants a dunya and al-akhirah at the same time. There's no way. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, "Minkum man yuridu dunya wa minkum man yuridu al-akhirah." Some of you wanted dunya and some of you want al-akhirah. The heart cannot have both. That's why the ulama were saying you can't have music in your heart and have the Quran in your heart. Your heart cannot have both. You can't have the love for al-munafiqeen and the love for al-mu'mineen. It just doesn't mix. There are certain things that just don't dissolve. You can attempt to dissolve water and oil and just attempt so hard and keep shaking it, but at the end, you're going to have one float up and one based on the density basically go down, but you cannot have things mixing just like that and think that you can have it both ways. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يَهْدِي الْقَوْمَ الْفَاسِقِينَ. For fisq, what is fisq? Fisq is to basically remove the peel off the fruit. In other words, when you remove the peel off the fruit, you basically give it more let's say in the air, more this air will basically bring in the different contaminants and the different things that prevent that peel that was preventing anything from getting inside the fruit. Then since you removed the peel, you made it exposed. And that's the same thing when we speak about al-fisq. Sharia acts as the peel that covers your heart from any contamination to get to it. So having that being said, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Inna Allah la yahdi al-qawma al-fasiqeen, meaning those people that had their hearts exposed to the different contaminants, then those are the people that will not find guidance. So let's say they will not be capable of finding guidance. They will not be capable of embracing qadarullah. They will not be capable of actually being able to overcome the different contaminants. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, سَأَصْرِفُ عَنْ آيَاتِي. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had mentioned that those that do not actually embrace Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's revelation, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's revelation was there in order to give you al-hidayah, in order to give you basically the ingredients to help you bring about the right recipe, the right ingredients, the right utensils to help your heart basically bring in the identity and certainly the label that you basically are going to be getting labeled with: mu'min, fasiq, or munafiq. This isn't talking about a meal, but this is just to help us understand metaphorically that you would, and at the end, would basically be the person to determine what you are, who you are at the end through your behavior. It's not enough to speak about Jannah. It's not enough to speak about hellfire unless you let all that you talk about become an action that you live. So therefore, when you look at وَمَا قَدَرُ اللَّهَ حَقَّ قَدْرِهِ, how do I embrace qadarullah subhanahu wa ta'ala? How do I embrace Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's power? You would embrace it by putting it into action. You would embrace it by putting the right ingredients, the right factors that would make the difference in your qalb, that would make the difference in your fu'ad, and that would make the difference in your mind as well. And that's the only thing that would make the difference in who you are at the end: mu'min, munafiq, fasiq, kafir, or a Muslim. What are you? Now, having that being said, when we look at the ayat that we were doing, when you see وَمَا قَدَرُ اللَّهَ حَقَّ قَدْرِهِ إِذْ قَالُوا مَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ عَلَى بَشَرٍ مِّن شَيْءٍ قُلْ مَنْ أَنزَلَ الكتاب الذي جاء به موسى نورا وهدى للناس تجعلونه قراطيس تبدونها وتخفون كثيرا. I want you to look at this one. We were talking earlier about the different ayat that relate to basically whether munafiqeen, al-afida, etc. But here's one thing. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, قُلْ مَنْ أَنزَلَ الكتاب. Say, who's the one that revealed the book that was sent on to Prophet Musa alayhi salam, contained in it the light, the guidance for people? I want you to look at this one. What did it contain? It contained the light. It contained the guidance. But even though they had it, but did they actually fully embrace it? Said تَجْعَلُونَهُ قَرَاطِيسَ. It was just written right there. You would hide some of it, and you would reveal some of it. In other words, what? To have those ayat hanging on the wall, that's not what makes you Muslim. To have that Quran in your house, that's not what makes you Muslim. What makes you Muslim is that when you embrace Nur, when you embrace the light, when you embrace al-hidayah. Remember what we had said before about Surah Fatir, and how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was telling us, أُولَٰئِكَ الَّذِينَ آتَيْنَاهُمُ الْكِتَابَ وَالْحُكْمَ وَالنُّبُوَّةَ. Those are the ones that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given al-kitab, al-hukma, wal-nubuwwah, the ones that put it into practice. Same thing. أورثنا الكتاب الذين اصطفينا من عبادنا. The ones that were chosen, the ones that had actually put in the effort, are the ones that are going to find themselves in Iman. You will not be somehow getting a miraculous spark telling you that it's time to find Iman unless you put it in action, unless you put in the effort to memorize the Quran, to learn, to study Tafseer, to enroll in a class, unless you put in the effort to attend a class, or unless you put in the effort to probably pay for your children to learn the Quran or learn Islam. They will cry, they will probably reject, they will probably resist in different ways, or you will probably resist unless you put in the effort to resist shaitan. You will not come to your success. It's that simple. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, تَجْعَلُونَهُ قَرَاطِيسَ. You would only make those words in just manuscripts, written format. تُبْدُونَهَا. You would expose some of it, but تُخْفُونَ كَثِيرًا. But conceal the rest. Why? Because you didn't want it to expose you. You would say that you believed in the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but the second that exposes a certain thing that you probably dislike, that's when they would say that they either reinterpreted. The other day was, I came across this video of some quote-unquote influencer who was actually making an interpretation for the ayah that when it was basically الرجال قوامون على النساء, and she said for the word تضربوهن or اضربوهن, that it doesn't mean to hit, or it doesn't mean to strike or anything of that sort, but it actually just means to keep distance. It means to walk away. It means all of those things that are irrelevant to how the Sahaba themselves understood the ayat. As a Muslim, don't care about how the West, liberals, feminists, or whatever group, how they had considered that the right way, quote unquote, to interpret the ayat or to change the society or whatever it is. What you need to take in consideration is, what did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reveal? How did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala solve the different situations during the time of the Prophet ﷺ and during our time? Don't reinterpret the text to suit not the feminist and not the liberals and not whomever, or the West or whatever it is. Don't change the interpretation, and don't manipulate yourself by thinking that somehow I was smart to get a different interpretation that suited the understanding that I wanted to believe in. Look at the ayat, look at the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and understand the Quran based on how the Prophet ﷺ interpreted it and how the Sahaba had understood it and explained it to us. And once they explain it to us, that's when I'm going to say, وَمَا كَانَ لِمُؤْمِنٍ وَلَا مُؤْمِنَةٍ إِذَا قَضَى اللَّهُ وَرَسُولُهُ أَمْرًا أَن يَكُونَ لَهُمُ الْخِيَرَةُ مِنْ أَمْرِهِمْ. Not be fit for a believing man or a believing woman. Once Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decrees a matter, that they would have their objection or their option or their choice of what they want the interpretation to look like or the decision to look like, to be on top of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's not be fit for a believing man or a believing woman. You submit to the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as is. So, عُلِّمْتُم مَّا لَمْ تَعْلَمُوا, and you were taught what you didn't know. What does that mean? In other words, that the information wasn't just nur and light to their mind or guidance to their heart, but it was also something that was expanding their knowledge in relationship with the world that not them and not their fathers had basically known, not even through experience, but it was a revelation because their own dhan was never going to be capable of getting to know the information without revelation. قُلِ اللَّهِ ثُمَّ ذَرْهُمْ. Then you as a believer, O Muhammad, you stand to educate. When others are spewing ignorance, you stand strong and قُلِ اللَّهِ, and say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and say the revelation, even when others will object, even when others will mock you, and ذَرْهُمْ فِي خَوْضِهِمْ يَلْعَبُونَ, and let them engage in this type of drowning, and they let them drown in their mere play that basically lacks the reality. And this is important. When you speak about al-la'ib is basically when somebody disregards reality and they would live in their own enthusiasm, in their own entertainment. They would get into that entertainment, but that entertainment just drowns them in a way in their dopamine where they would not consider and recognize reality until it hits them hard. You want to keep this one in mind. You know, when you look at pain can sometimes be a gift. Why? Because the pain that you feel now is basically going to, one, let you know that there is some harm that you need to take in consideration and that you have to invest in uplifting it. If you do not, and you decide to ignore the pain is going to get worse and worse and probably become fatal. That's why, you know, there's that book, The Gift of Pain. And he was talking about those, the people that had leprosis, and because they could not feel pain, they then put themselves in even worse illnesses. They would lose their limbs, they would become blind, they would become deaf, they would, and the list goes on and on. Why? Because they couldn't even recognize pain. Their body, their nerves couldn't even feel pain anymore, and that made them more susceptible to endangering themselves. And then they eventually become blind, deaf, lose their limbs, and etc., even though they can't actually feel pain. And when you look at that, ذَرْهُمْ فِي خَوْضِهِمْ يَلْعَبُونَ, that's telling us that they may not recognize the pain right now because they're engaging in this entertainment and they're putting in all their enthusiasm in this entertainment. They're drowning themselves in that entertainment, but what they don't recognize is that there is a bigger pain, the magnificent pain coming at them, whether it's a curse in this dunya or whether it's an adhab yawm al-qiyamah. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had said, وَهَذَا كِتَابٌ أَنزَلْنَاهُ مُبَارَكٌ, that this is the revelation that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had sent as Mubarak. What is Mubarak? Mubarak, that it contains all the good. In it, you will find an increase in good. You will find in it the nur and the huda, and certainly an increased level of guidance to help you. One, it is مُصَدِّقُ الَّذِي بَيْنَ يَدَيْهِ. It is completing, and certainly completing the nur and the huda that was revealed in the previous scriptures. And two, it is what لتنذر أم القرى ومن حولها. And it also contains the warning not only to the city of the people of Quraysh, but it is also all around from one orbit to another, from one city to another, to make it a universal revelation, a revelation to all mankind. وَالَّذِينَ يُؤْمِنُونَ بِالْآخِرَةِ يُؤْمِنُونَ بِهِ. And those that would believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or in Judgment Day, they would be the ones to believe in it. وَهُمْ عَلَى صَلَاتِهِمْ يُحَافِظُونَ. And the ones that would believe in the hereafter, they would believe in the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because they recognize that it was revealed onto the Prophet from the Lord Almighty. They would be the ones to put in that commitment. Remember, it's not enough to believe in it, but it would be something that you put in as a commitment. It's not enough to say, I believe in Islam, unless you really put in consistency. And that's the word yuhafidhun. That's the word yuhafidhun. It's basically to be inconsistent, being consistent with the words, with the revelation, and be committed in it. وَمَنْ أَظْلَمُ مِمَّنِ افْتَرَى عَلَى اللَّهِ كَذِبًا. وَمَنْ أَظْلَمُ مَنِ افْتَرَى عَلَى اللَّهِ كَذِبًا أَوْ قَالَ أُوحِيَ إِلَيَّ وَلَمْ يُوحَ إِلَيْهِ شَيْءٌ وَمَنْ قَالَ سَأُنْزِلُ مِثْلَ مَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ وَلَوْ تَرَى إِذِ الظَّالِمُونَ فِي غَمَرَاتِ الْمَوْتِ وَالْمَلَائِكَةُ بَاسِطُو أَيْدِيهِمْ أَخْرِجُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ الْيَوْمَ تُجْزَوْنَ عَذَابَ الْهُونِ بِمَا كُنْتُمْ تَقُولُونَ عَلَى اللَّهِ غَيْرَ الْحَقِّ وَكُنْتُمْ عَنْ آيَاتِهِ تَسْتَكْبِرُونَ. This is one of the scariest ayat. What does it say? And there is no oppression farther than those that would claim words on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they would claim words of lies. Or they would say that they had received a revelation when nothing was revealed unto them. Or they had said, I will reveal what is similar to what Allah has revealed. And if you were to see the oppressors, when they would be sinking and drowning in death, and the angels with their hands stretched, saying, let your souls depart. اليوم تجزون عذاب الهون. Today you will be punished. The punishment of humiliation for what you used to say and attribute to the Lord Almighty in other than truth. And you were arrogant to embracing the words of Allah Almighty. A very scary ayah. Okay, let's just break it down. How is this related to the ayah before it? This is related to the ayah before it in a number of different ways. Number one, we did actually talk about the difference between anzala and nazzala, but then you look at this ayah, this is right there telling us, well, what the people of the book, or even if you were to talk about Quraysh, because there are two different qira'at. The first qira'ah, تجعلونه قراطيس تبدونها وتخفون كثيرا. So what are we looking at? We're speaking about تجعلونه. This would be a pronoun that basically would be directed at تجعلونه. So you're directed at a second person. You would be doing such and such. That is it talking to the Jews, or is it talking to the people of Quraysh? Well, no, it would be talking to the Jews because it was a first person. or sorry, right there, you would do that, though this is directed at them. But another قراءة يجعلونه قراطيس يبدونها ويخفون كثيرا. So therefore, it was using a third person. They would put it in written scripts. They would hide it and conceal or expose some of it and conceal the rest. They would. So when we say they would, which is يجعلونه يبدونها يخفون كثيرا, this would be telling the people of Quraysh that this is what the Jews were doing. But if we read it in قراءة تجعلونه قراطيس تبدونها وتخفون, this would be directed at the Yahud. It was talking to them directly. Okay, so when you look at وَهَذَا كِتَابٌ أَنزَلْنَاهُ مُبَارَكٌ مُصَدِّقُ الَّذِي بَيْنَ يَدَيْهِ, this is in order to bring about this this alternative to what they had concealed, what they had hidden, what they had not fully embraced in action. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, well, here's the alternative. This book basically is a book that contains the truth, etc., as we had said before. And then وَمَنْ أَظْلَمُ, there's no worse sin. When you look at ظَلَمَ, ظَلَمَ actually means to exceed the limit. So وَمَنْ أَظْلَمُ, this is not an interrogative clause, but this is an informative clause. This is telling you, well, no, that there's nothing worse in terms of a transgression than a person who would claim ممن افترى. What is al-iftira? Al-iftira is to make up a lie. Iftara is to make up a lie. It basically means to claim. It basically means a person is literally forming a lie and they know it's not true, but they would basically اختلق. They would completely make up a lie. And then the person that is listening may sometimes not know whether this is the truth or not. The worst of the lies are the lies that contain some truth within it. That's the worst of the lies. Why? Because it becomes harder to spot. Becomes harder to spot and be able to sift the lie or the truth from falsehood. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exposes them, and he says, وَمَنْ أَظْلَمُ افْتَرَى عَلَى اللَّهِ كَذِبًا أَوْ قَالَ أُوحِيَ إِلَيْهِ, or they would claim that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had revealed something onto them, and therefore they would claim that they were prophets. Wait a minute. Did anybody else claim that they were prophets during the time of the Prophet ﷺ? When in reality, لَمْ يُوحَى إِلَيْهِ شَيْءٍ, when in reality, nothing had actually been revealed onto them? Yes. What are some of those stories? We're talking about Rahman al-Yamama, or Musaylam al-Kadhab, al-Aswad al-Ansi. We're talking about a female. Her name is Sajah, who later got married to Musaylam al-Kadhab. She was from Bani Taghlib. And what happened? They basically had claimed that they were prophets. And each and every single one had their own story and had their own way of how they had followers. Just keep that one in mind. They had followers. I want you to look at the word followers, because that's the same story today. You know, the irony is that at the time, they would have followers, but they wouldn't know the exact number of the people that were following them. But today, in the age that we would see everything is about numbers, we would know pretty much the exact number of how many people are following this scholar, how many people are following this jahil person, how many people are following this singer, this musician, this kafir. We would know the followers on TikTok, on Facebook, YouTube, subscribers, whatever it is. And then we would know the numbers of those that considered these people as influencers, as people worthy of scrolling or people worthy of listening to. Guess what? During that time, they also had these kind of influencers, but they weren't just these people. Let's look at this one. Look at this one. Al-Qurtubi says one very important thing. He says, وَمِنْ هَذَا النَّمَطِ مَنْ أَعْرَضَ عَنِ الْفِقْهِ وَالسُّنَنِ. Whoa, what does that mean? And he said, and based on this paradigm is basically, it would also mean and include whoever would go away and turn away from al-fiqh, from understanding Islamic jurisprudence, from understanding Islam, and even understanding what the Prophet ﷺ had taught. In other words, what? He's basically saying that if somebody is making up their definition of what makes ethics, their definition of what makes justice, their definition of what makes people's rights, women's rights, children's rights, and all of that, that is also included within this ayah. وَمَنْ أَظْلَمُ مِمَّنِ افْتَرَى عَلَى اللَّهِ كَذِبًا. It would also include, look at this one, فَيَقُولُ, and he said, وَمَا كَانَ عَلَيْهِ السَّلَفُ مِنَ السُّنَنِ, and plus not only fiqh, not only understanding what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had revealed in terms of basically jurisprudence and Islamic legislature, or even what the Prophet ﷺ had mentioned in terms of sunan, but also what the Salaf, whether the Sahaba, the Tabi'een, and what they had actually had mentioned in terms of guidance. And then he said, فَيَقُولُ, and someone, I would have actually put a semicolon right there, but whatever. فيقول وقع في خاطري كذا أو أخبرني قلبي بكذا فيحكمون بما يقع في قلوبهم ويغلب عليهم من خواطرهم. He said, and someone will say, I was given such and such inspiration. I felt, and basically come in and use that there was an inspiration that they got, a light that somehow they received, or some kind of a thought on whatever it is. And he said, and they would claim that it was because of some level of an epiphany, or some level of just clarity of mind, or some moment that they were probably driving along and this thought comes to them, and they didn't even recognize that that was probably coming from shaitan. But how do I know if it's a shaitan? Yes, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَإِنَّ الشَّيَاطِينَ لَيُوحُونَ إِلَىٰ أَوْلِيَائِهِمْ. Even Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, shayateen would give an inspiration, لَيُوحُونَ إِلَىٰ أَوْلِيَائِهِمْ, to those that follow shayateen. And how do I know if this is a satanic inspiration or whether it's from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Shayateen would only order you for what is wrong. Shayateen would only order you to go against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How do I know? Well, simple. The only way to know that falsehood is by knowing truth. So know your Islam, learn your Islam, learn the Sunan, learn how the Salaf had explained Islam. And if the inspiration, quote unquote, that you got was an antagonist, different from what was basically taught in the Quran and in the Sunnah, in the explanation of the scholars or the Salaf, then be sure and be certain that this is coming from Shaitan. So let's continue. And he said that they would claim that somehow they had received divine interpretation, and that basically got them to a new understanding and a new interpretation. Go ahead. Okay. Khasatullah, you said, can you take a pause, Ustaza? First, pray for Anas al-Sharif. Yes, inshallah. We will do that, inshallah. Ustaza Umayya, you want to say something, dear?
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa
Alaikum
barakatuh.
assalam wa rahmatullah.
What is the difference between al-ilham and al-khawatir? What Allah guide me like ilham, put in my heart, and how I can differentiate between its khatira or its ilham? How? With this
Okay.
ayah,
So
inshallah.
even though a little irrelevant to what we're actually talking about, because the most important thing that what we say is basically going back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in understanding Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in understanding the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when we look at it, ilham, they're basically just different thoughts that maybe basically come from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or maybe wahi, or maybe just, hey, we're just having this ilham. I got this idea that occurred to me by looking at the different things, probably on the situation, that, in other words, the data that surrounds me, etc., and that would basically inspire me to do what is right. Il-Khatira is more of an idea that would come to your heart or come to your mind, whether it's a good, evil, whatever it is. Okay, it can be from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it can be from your own nafs, it can be from shaitan. And in other words, you're talking about al-Khatira could actually be wider than ilham. Ilham is more specific. Okay, so every ilham is khatira, but no, not every khatira is ilham. Okay, every ilham is khatira. What is it in English? Ilham in English would more be an inspiration. Okay, il-khatira, an occurrence. It occurred to you, something happened, or some, etc. Okay, so that's a little different than what we're talking about, because what we're talking about right here is more of understanding. So when we're speaking about a claim, we're making here a statement that this is the truth, and we would claim that this actually has a foundation. Okay, and the foundation that they wanted to claim was that there was wahi, and we talked about Musaylim al-Kadhab, etc. But al-Qurtubi wanted to go further and actually say that from the same idea, from the same concept, you would basically have those that would claim that they had received some kind of a revelation, some kind of a thought. And then they would say, well, I've got the evidence to prove that it's permissible for me to have a fatwa, even if it opposes people's fatwa. And they would say, well, here's the hadith. It says, istafti qalbaka wa in aftaka al-muftun. Ask your heart. So I'm just going to let my heart do the job, even if, I've got all these people telling me that that isn't true. I've got all these muftiin, I've got all these muftis, I've got all these people telling me that otherwise, but I'm just going to let my heart do the job and do basically this fatwa right there. I want you to stop at this one, because we would have a lot of people misunderstand this ayah or this hadith, and then they would say, well, after, when we're speaking about istafti qalbak, and then they would engage in their own personal fatwa and not understand that, wait a minute, this does not mean that you would go against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, let's just see a couple things here. Okay, and let's say, I'm just going to let you see this hadith right there. Let's see. So this hadith on Wabisa ibn Ma'bad, there you go. He said that he came to the Prophet ﷺ, and the Prophet ﷺ said, جئت تسألني عن البر والإثم فقال نعم. So here's Ma'bad, here's Wabisa. He came to the Prophet ﷺ, and the Prophet ﷺ had said, you had come to ask me about bir, about righteousness, and about ithm, about sin. And he said, yes. Then the Prophet ﷺ, فجمع أنامله فجعل ينكث بهن في صدري. The Prophet ﷺ then, when you kind of like when you would grab your fingers all together, he grabbed his fingers all together and started kind of like a little bang on the chest. And he said, يا وابصة استفتي قلبك واستفتي نفسك, 3 times. So what did he do? Kind of combined like his fingers from one hand, okay? And then just banged and kind of put it on his heart, on Wabisa's heart. And he said, Wabisa, ask your heart, ask your heart, ask your heart, 3 times. And he said, حياتي البر ما اطمأنت إليه النفس والإثم ما حاك في النفس وتردد في الصدر وإن أفتاك الناس وأفتوك. Let's see. He said, البر is what your heart is content over. And ithm is what you would feel. Haka. What is il-haka? Il-haka is when something creates some kind of a tension. Il-ithm is when there's a tension that you would feel in your nafs, in yourself. وَتَرَدَّدَ فِي الصَّدْرِ, and you would see that it's fluctuating, it's basically right there, moving, trembling in your heart, even when people would come to you, giving you all those fatwas. But here's one thing. When you look at this one, how do I understand this quote? When we would go to other quotes, the Prophet ﷺ explains it. Let's look at this one. So this hadith, you could say, Rawahu Imam Ahmad, al-Albani said it was Hasan, and Nawawi had also said it was al-Hasan actually means it's a certain level of hadith that is authentic. You could see al-Mundhiri, Shawkani, all of those basically had said it was a certain level of Hasan hadith. Basically, al-Hasan, it just has one thing that is, let's say, missing within it compared to a hadith sahih. Hadith al-Sahih, basically, all the chain of narration is connected. Number 2 is that you have the chain of narration, all those narrators, they're basically all, let's say, living to the highest level of righteousness, okay? And then we've got basically that level of righteousness is not the only thing, but even their mental capacity. And you've got the fourth one is that, so in Arabic we say متصل إسناده بنقل العدل الضابط عن العدل الضابط إلى منتهى من غير شذوذ ولا علة قادحة. That's the definition for hadith sahih. You've got all the chain of narration, each and every single person in that chain of narration, mentally sound, righteous, certainly met the other person that had narrated the hadith. Okay, and certainly that narration does not contradict with another let's call it a higher chain of narration that is considered probably at a higher level of authenticity. Okay. So then what makes it hadith al-Hasan? Al-Hadith al-Hasan, the wording wasn't up to the level and the standard of another stronger chain of narration. Okay, so let's see right there. So you want us to look further into the wording. That's what you're saying. Yes, that's the inference. Let's see. This hadith is actually narrated in Sahih Muslim, making it even stronger than this hadith. Okay, let's see. The Prophet ﷺ tells and defines al-birr for Nawas ibn Sam'an. He said, al-birru husnul khuluq, wal-ithmu ma haka fi sadrik, wa karihta an yattali alayhi an-nas. He said, al-birr, righteousness, is the best, is to actually have good mannerisms. Sin is what you would feel a stress or a basically ma haka fi sadrik, you would feel something's not right about this. And then karihta an yattali alayhi an-nas, and you would hate anybody seeing you do what you're doing. All right. In another Abu Tha'lab al-Khushani, and you could say, he said, al-birru ma sakanat ilayhi an-nafs. Al-birr is when your self, your inner self, finds tranquility in whatever behavior you're going to do. وَاطْمَأَنَّ إِلَيْهِ الْقَلْبِ, and the heart was also finding tranquility in it. وَالْإِثْمُ مَا لَمْ تَسْكُنْ إِلَيْهِ النَّفْسِ, in contrast to sin, well, in contrast to righteousness, sin, on the other hand, لم تسكن إليه النفس. What is a sukun anyways? A sukun is when something is not trembling, something is stable, something is calm. Okay? When something is calm. And you want to look at this one. If البر اطمأن إليه القلب and الإثم ما لم تسكن إليه, what does that mean? That's when you look at these antonyms. الطمأنينة is the opposite of الحاكة, right there. You got طمأنة and you got حاكة. الطمأنينة is when something is stable, when something is finding peace, when something is finding stability. Al-ithm is instability. Al-ithm is instability. That's how you would know it. And therefore, one main reason to the rise of mental illness is as a result of engaging in ithm. Why? Because al-ithm, it is instability. You find instability in the heart, and that instability will later basically affect your mind, will affect your behavior, will affect the people around you, will even affect the whole country. That instability goes from you to the whole city. Yes, that's what we would say as the positive force and the negative force. The positive force would basically be it would be the akhlaq that you would practice, and it would bring tranquility and peace to you. That's why when you know, it's quite interesting. When you see Ibn Qudama in his book, Ibn al-Qayyim, in his book, who he had written, actually, he called it Zad al-Ma'ad في هدي خير العباد. What is Zad al-Ma'ad? Zad al-Ma'ad is almost 5 volumes. what he did, and by the way, that book is translated into English, okay? In at least the summary of it, okay? And زاد المعاد في هدي خير العباد, in that book, which he had actually written under moonlight, and he called it زاد المعاد, like the shelter, the food that you would carry along with you while you're traveling. When you're traveling, when you know you're not a resident within a certain area, you basically try to stick with less and fewer items. Why? Because you know you're not going to be there forever. You know you're not going to be a resident here. So you just carry a number of different small items, and because you want to make sure that they don't become a burden while you're traveling. Okay. So he wrote زاد المعاد في هدي خير العباد. And what did he say? He said the طمأنينة in his book, because it's basically a book on reflections on Sirah, really. The reflections on Sirah, and in his book, he would talk about, part of it at least, he would talk about the inspiration that he would see in the gate that the Prophet ﷺ would walk in. So just the way he would walk. The Sahaba described his walk that it was qasda. It was like there's qasd in it. That he's on a mission. And from that gate, he said, you would see that it reflects what is in his heart. His heart was a man on a mission. And so was his gait. So was the way that he would look at things. You would see the mission in the way he gazed, in the way he spoke, in the way he talked, in the way he walked, in the way he slept. He was a man on a mission. When you look at الطمأنينة doesn't just become something within your heart. It radiates on your eyes, and you will see a person that is not afraid. You will see a person that is living tranquility. You will see a person that is living happiness. You will see a person that is not easily provoked. You will see a person that is calm even when they're angry. They would never get beyond their akhlaq. They would be connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. A person that has their طمأنينة in their heart would never say words of profanity, would never use those kind of words. Why? Because الطمأنينة استقرت في القلب. Because once the طمأنينة had really went deep in the heart, they would always feel it radiating, even on their face, even on their mind, even on their behavior, even during those moments that they could be raged and probably will use the word lost it, but they would never lose their iman. Why? Because it went deep into the core. It was part of al-fu'ad. It got cooked deep inside. It became part of al-fu'ad. Al-fu'ad is deep inside. Al-qalb is the general one. Al-fu'ad is deep inside. الإثم ما لم تسكن إليه النفس وإن أفتاك المفتون ولم يطمئن إليه القلب وإن أفتاك المفتون. So what does that mean? Does that mean that certainly استفتي نفسك وإن أفتاك الناس وأفتوك or وأفتوك? Does that mean we could just based on that, we don't have to listen to people's fatwa and we could just make up our own fatwa? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And that's why, of course, الإعلام الموقعين, even though إعلام الموقعين is 2 big volumes, and I mean big, every single volume is really, really big. I mean, it's like, it's not an A4, it's actually the A3 kind. And it's really big, and it's every single volume. I can't even, right now, it's like I have it in my right in front of me. It was a brown copy, and like an A3 copy in 2 volumes. Every volume is almost 600 pages or 500 pages. But in that book, he did actually, there are 2 different ways. Is it أعلام الموقعين or إعلام الموقعين? Most scholars actually said it was إعلام الموقعين. Okay. And that he basically, quote, had mentioned, I'll just here summarize it. And he said, if something is against the Quran and the Sunnah, or we know that something is basically known as a derived from the Quran and Sunnah, to claim that I have a different fatwa that I felt is actually shaitani. Okay, but what are we talking about? That even if people would tell you otherwise, if it basically comes from Quran and Sunnah, that even if people are opposing you against that fatwa, you would not take their words for it just because they had said it. You would go back to Quran and Sunnah, and that's your reference, not the reference that my heart had said, even though it opposes the Quran and the Sunnah, but I feel in my heart that is shaitani. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made it clear that there is no Nabi, there is no revelation after the Prophet ﷺ. So this ayah, أو قال أوحي إلي ولم يوحى إليه شيء, and nothing was revealed unto them, they would be included as this is the biggest dhulm, and this is the biggest oppression and biggest blasphemy that anybody could make, is to claim that they have an interpretation based on an inspiration, and even though the text says otherwise, but saying, well, I've got the evidence to back up that it's okay for me to go against what was probably mentioned or written, etc., because I have a different personal inspiration. I could feel it in my heart. Sorry, but that's a shaitani inspiration. Okay, let's see. And he said, and some will claim that they had some similar interpretation, just like Prophet Musa alayhi salam had come to basically al-Khadr, even though some, the word al-Khadr or the name al-Khadr, okay, not all scholars would agree that it was al-Khadr, but regardless, that's not our issue right now. I did talk about it another time, okay? But at the end, to use that as an evidence, and you'll find that a lot in the Sufi circles. I know I praise the Sufis at many times, but sometimes you have to expose some of the deviation and the exploitation, using that word again, the exploitation that many would exploit the ignorance of the attendees. Why? Because it's a lot easier to exploit and manipulate the masses when they're ignorant. And it's so easy to use words of inspiration / motivation and get many followers, because the more ilm the person has, the more the stronger, and they would be capable of spotting the discrepancies, the contradictions, and certainly the gaps within those motivational speeches. Ilm and alim would say, yeah, that sounded inspiration to you, but guess what? It had zero inspiration coming to me, because all it contained was ignorance. and this is important, in order for you to be capable of spotting the manipulation and also this iftira or the blasphemy attributed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but in the reality and in fact, it is nothing but a satanic inspiration, you need to get ilm. If you don't have ilm, you're going to be exploited and manipulated by many of those that would be motivational speakers or maybe inspirational or maybe having this eloquence. And inna min al-bayani la sihra, the Prophet said, part of eloquence actually contains some magic in it. We're not talking about magic where, this black magic. No, we're speaking about that manipulation, fooling many. And most people right now would actually get fooled easily because they lack ilm. In order to have the ilm, you need to put in the effort to learn the deen, to make sure you know what is authentic, what is not authentic, what actually is lugha Arabiya, what is not lugha Arabiya, what the ayat really say, what does this word in Arabic actually mean, what is the grammar piece of it, what are the different qira'at, what do the Sahaba actually say, what do the scholars say about this. Those are your resources. If you don't have those resources in place, if you don't know how to go back to these resources, if those motivational speakers are basically speaking of things and giving you that and they're not quoting a scholar, they're not quoting. That's why I'm trying to show you right there and say, hey, here's what al-Qurtubi says, not making this up. If this person is not showing you those references, you're following the wrong person. You're learning from the wrong people. Yes, it probably might sound very inspirational. Maybe it sounds like, oh, this really hit me hard. But guess what? It might actually be coming from shaitan. You really need to make sure that you have your resources in place. Let's say, here al-Qurtubi says, وَهَذَا الْقَوْلُ زَنْدَقَةٌ وَكُفْرٌ يقتل قائله ولا يستتاب ولا يحتاج معه إلى سؤال ولا جواب. Period. What did he say? He said, if somebody claims that they don't need to actually get to ما تجلى له من تلك العلوم, if he says, well, I don't need to go to all these resources in these books and all of that, because I would be basically just, I would have ilm ladun. That's what they will use. They will use this word, that they will have the ilm just like al-Khadr had, and that just like Musa was seeking the ilm from al-Khadr, even though he was a prophet, he said, that means al-Khadr was actually more knowledgeable. So I don't need to go to the resource. I basically can go to the inspiration. And if somebody were to claim that they had ilm ladun and therefore they don't need to go back to the resources, here al-Qurtubi says this is zandaqatun wa kufr. This is actually disbelief, and he said the person would actually be considered as deserving the punishment of the punishment of to be killed, and not even ask them to yustatab. What is al-istitaba? Al-istitaba is to give them some time to basically consider repentance and all of that. And he said we would not even need to, engage in any type of a question, etc. If this is what was proven that they had said, in other words, they had committed ridda. They had committed ridda. They had just left Islam. Because if this person had said that they had received some kind of a revelation, right there, this is kufr. قَالَ أُوحِيَ إِلَيْهِ. They had said that they had basically received some kind of a revelation, no need to go back to resources, etc. Then you had just left the religion. And this, believe it or not, happens a lot with a lot of Sufi sects. But guess what? It's not Sufi sects alone. Not all Sufi sects are like that. But you have some Sufi sects, they will do that. But right now, there's a wider group that is right now, ladies, please pay attention to this one. Because right now, we're actually getting people that may use, whether it's ChatGPT or probably, hey, be capable of going to a quote here and there, and then they would read you a quote here and there, and you may not know that this was taken out of context, and it seems like, hey, this is Quran and Sunnah. She basically gave me Quran and Sunnah, and you may not know the discrepancy that, no, she actually took it out of context, or he took it out of context. That's not what it says. Taking it out of context is actually taking it and misusing those resources. And that's a form of iftira ala Allah al-kadhib. That's a form of creating blasphemy and making lies on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because to take something out of context or to interpret something out of the way that it was recited or the way that it was interpreted by the Prophet ﷺ is basically a form of blasphemy. It's a form of making up lies. Let's see. وَمَنْ قَالَ سَأُنزِلُ مِثْلَ مَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ. Or those that would say, I will reveal just as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had revealed. Here's a story. He said, Al-Muradu Abdullah ibn Abi Sarh al-Amiri. Who is that? What happened? So this guy has a story. Let me tell you the story. Abdullah ibn Abi Sarh, he became Muslim. And guess what? He was even writing the Quran. He was amongst the scribers of the Quran. One day, the ayah in Surah al-Mu'minun, وَلَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ مِنْ سُلَالَةٍ مِّن طِينٍ, the Prophet ﷺ calls him in order to write the ayah down. But then once he was done, then finally he read ثُمَّ أَنشَأْنَاهُ خَلْقًا آخَرَ. Then we had evolved him into a new creation, etc. Abdullah was astonished at the details of what the ayah was talking about in terms of human creation and human development. In the early stages of human creation, we're talking about in the mother's womb. Then he said, فَتَبَارَكَ اللَّهُ أَحْسَنُ الْخَالِقِينَ. Then he said, تَبَارَكَ اللَّهُ أَحْسَنُ الْخَالِقِينَ. So the Prophet ﷺ then said, that's what was revealed unto me. تَبَارَكَ اللَّهُ أَحْسَنُ الْخَالِقِينَ. That's when Abdullah ibn Abi Sarh went into skepticism and doubt. And then he said, if Muhammad ﷺ was a true prophet, well, then I received a revelation exactly like his. And if he was an imposter, then I was capable of saying what he had said. So he left the religion and he went back to Mecca. And that was the revelation, وَمَنْ قَالَ سَأُنزِلُ مِثْلَ مَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ. Guess what happened? That wasn't the end of the story. There's actually more to the story. What happened? Well, let's go back to this and see what happened. So there were other ones when the Prophet ﷺ had went to Mecca. Remember, who are we talking about? We're talking about Abdullah ibn Abi Sarh, or there was a similar name, Abdullah ibn Sa'd ibn Abi Sarh, kind of abbreviated, okay? That the Prophet ﷺ in the 8th year, Hijrah, the Prophet ﷺ had said, Man dakhala dara Abu Sufyan fahuwa amin. whoever closes the door on themselves, أغلق بابه فهو آمن. Whoever closes the door on himself, they're going to be safe. Whoever enters the home of Abu Sufyan is going to be آمن. They're going to be safe. And then he said, 4 people are not safe. Why? He said, Abdul Uzza ibn Khatal, Miqyas ibn Subaba, Abdullah ibn Sa'd ibn Abi Sarh, Sara. Wait, those are not safe? Yeah, they're not going to be safe. Why not? Well, Abdul Uzza ibn Khatal, he basically did something really dangerous. You know what he did? Abdul Uzza, he was actually asked to collect certain donations, okay, from a certain tribe, and he had along with him another Sahabi, okay? And this other Sahabi that was with him, I guess the amount of money to him was looking very attractive. So what he did was kill that Sahabi, take the money, and run away, and basically go back to Mecca. And what did he do? He was also making poetry. In other words, kind of like today, if you were to have followers, you were to have, of course, at the time, poetry was the way to become famous. So he was also making poetry against the Prophet ﷺ, warmongering, and basically making poetry to assassinate, or at least call for the assassination of the Prophet ﷺ. Miqyas ibn Subaba, that is different. You know what he did? He actually killed. So his brother got killed, and the Prophet ﷺ, of course, his brother got killed by mistake. And Miqyas was actually fighting with the mushrikeen. And when his brother got killed by mistake, then the Prophet ﷺ was going to give the blood money basically to his family. But then he thought, well, let me seize the moment. I'll pretend to be Muslim just to get the money. So he pretended to be Muslim, goes and basically gets the money. Okay, gets the money. And after he gets the money, then he goes back and basically kills that Sahabi, another Sahabi basically. And then he goes back to Mecca. So he was really just wanting the money. He was claiming to be Muslim, took the money, and then basically went back to Mecca. And he was also warmongering. Now, this guy was actually a poet, and one of the strongest poets in Mecca. Now, as for this guy, which Abdullah ibn Abi Sarh al-Amiri, has a different story. I know we kind of delayed it right there. This guy's story is that we just read how, he was the Katib al-Wahy, and then he basically says, well, I can make the same, and and he said, I've got a wahy right there, and goes back to Mecca and basically runs away. And then when the Prophet ﷺ comes to Mecca, he goes to his milk brother. Milk brother? Yeah, he goes to his milk brother. Who's his milk brother? Uthman bin Affan. That Khalifa? Yeah, that Khalifa. That was his milk brother. So what is a milk brother anyways? A milk brother means they had both been nursed from the same mother. Okay, so that was his milk brother. Okay. And he knew that Uthman bin Affan had a very special position with the Prophet ﷺ. So he goes to his milk brother and Uthman bin Affan, basically, and asks him to somehow intercede. and protect him from the Prophet ﷺ basically executing him. So that's when the Prophet ﷺ gives him a couple months. But then later on, Abdullah ibn Abi Sarh, when he had felt that the Prophet ﷺ was a true prophet, that's when he had become Muslim again. So he left Islam and became Muslim again. Yes, he left Islam and fought against the Prophet ﷺ and became Muslim again. Yeah, he became Muslim again. And Abdullah ibn Abi Sarh, how did he become Muslim anyways? So he was standing with, was Abdullah ibn Abi Sarh, it was Hakim ibn Khuzam, it was Abu Sufyan. They were standing together. And then one of them said, when they had seen Bilal ibn Rabah basically go on to the Kaaba, they said, thank God my father's not alive to see this disgrace. The other one said, I'm not going to say anything. I'm afraid these rocks might actually inform Muhammad ﷺ of what I had said or what we had said, and then probably order for our execution, that is. So then the Prophet ﷺ stands in front of them and says, this is what you had said, this is what you had said. And that's when they would make the shahada again. So Abdullah ibn Abi Sarh basically makes his shahada. But Abdullah ibn Abi Sarh was so shy to look at the Prophet ﷺ's face because of the warmongering that he was doing and because of the poetry that he had said against the Prophet ﷺ. So he would tell Uthman bin Affan to explain to the Prophet ﷺ that he was extremely shy to raise his eyes and even look at the face of the Prophet ﷺ. So the Prophet ﷺ then smiles and says, Islam erases all the sins committed before. That was, those stories. And then Sarah. There are actually different, was it Sarah alone? There were two women, at least, that were ordered for execution. And let me just tell you, the names actually are in dispute to who these ladies were, but what these ladies used to do is that they were singers, but they weren't doing any kind of music. The music that they were doing was, there was a Harith ibn al-Nadr, or Nadr ibn Harith, okay? He was a very rich man, and he was also using some women singers, kind of like today you have some people that just have a good voice and they basically manage to send messages through music or poetry and or comedy or whatever it is. And these women were warmongering through music. And that Nadr ibn al-Harith was one of these people that was actually sponsoring all of this. They're just like today. You have certain rich people would sponsor perhaps a think tank, or sponsor a singer, or sponsor books, or sponsor maybe shows, or sponsor. And yes, there are people, and this is why it's very important, just like you would have those music concerts, those influencers, you would have certain people sponsor them. We need to have people sponsor the people of good to do what they're doing, whether it's an author or whether it's somebody doing khair and all the different types of khair, whether it's somebody they're capable of maybe giving dawah at the masjid, or maybe they're probably wanting to collect money to build a well in Africa or whatever it is. Or maybe this person is needing to have maybe a media outlet or whatever it is. these types of sponsors are necessary in order to correct these adversaries, to basically correct the opposition as well to the other type of sponsors. And this is important. You had Uthman bin Affan, who basically had funded and sponsored all and majority of those in Ghazwat Tabuk. Just imagine. Yes, it was this type of millionaire that was capable of doing that. Okay, going back to the surah right there. Now, when al-Qurtubi had said that was related to Abdullah ibn Abi Sarh, you had, let's say, other scholars, they said Abdullah ibn Sa'd ibn Abi Sarh. By the way, Abdullah ibn Sa'd ibn Abi Sarh, or Abdullah ibn Abi Sarh, okay, later became the main figure, the main leader. First of all, he was later assigned to be the wali, like the minister over Mecca after the death of the Prophet ﷺ. And later, he was the leader to bring Islam to Sudan and Algeria, Libya, Tunisia, and pretty much all over North Africa except Egypt, because Egypt, that was a different story. So it was Abdullah ibn Abi Sarh. He was that leader. Just imagine. So just because someone probably might have a bad history, that doesn't necessarily mean that they can never stand up on their feet again and actually bring in a new legacy. A new legacy. Just remember that one. A new legacy. Ya Rabbi. Okay, so this is basically right there that we kind of anticipated. And he said that Muhammad ibn Ishaq, that he basically said that it was revealed onto in relationship, that is Abdullah ibn Sa'd ibn Abi Sarh, basically the name longer, that he had left Islam, and then the Prophet ﷺ had ordered Abdullah ibn Khatal, Miqyas ibn Subaba, even though he was a poet, and he said, even if you find him hanging on to the drapery of al-Kaaba, that he would be killed. So wait a minute, but did Abdullah ibn Khatal actually get killed? Yes, he did. What about Miqyas? Yeah, both got killed. What about, well, Abdullah ibn Abi Sarh, he didn't get killed, because remember, that was his brother, in that was his milk brother. Okay, and we said this story. So all of this we just mentioned all of the story. Let's see. Abu Umar said, "Aslam Abdullah ibn Abi Sarh ayyam al-Fath." Who's Abu Umar? Abu Umar is basically Ibn Abd al-Barr, a Maliki scholar from Al-Andalus, Ishbiliya. And he said, Abdullah ibn Abi Sarh, he basically had become Muslim again on the 8th year Hijrah, the day that the Muslims conquered Mecca. And he fahasuna Islamu, and he had become a good Muslim, and nothing after that was basically exposed. And in fact, he was part of the intelligent and wise and very hospitable people of Quraysh. And later on, Uthman bin Affan had assigned him to be on Egypt as basically a leader on Egypt. And he said, and many cities in the year 27 Hijriya. When you look at the word Ifriqiya, this is talking about Tunisia in particular. Tunisia and parts of Algeria and parts of Libya. That's Ifriqiya. Okay, they used to call that Ifriqiya. Not Ifriqiya to meaning all over the continent of Africa. And he said, and he had غزا منها الأساود من أرض النوبة. And he said he basically had also he said invaded, or at least Nuba. Basically, this is northern parts of Sudan in the year 31-year Hijriya. Okay. And certainly in Sawari, we're speaking about parts of the Balkans, part of certain cities. We're speaking about certain cities or certain islands, basically, in the Mediterranean as well. In Ard al-Rum, in 34-year Hijriya. Yeah, just look at this one, man. And then لما رجع من وفرته منعه ابن أبي حذيفة. And that's what I meant by he had a different story in Egypt, because Ibn Abi Hudayfa then had prevented him from entering al-Fustat. So then he continued to Asqalan. Asqalan. Where's Asqalan? Where's Asqalan? Right? Where's Asqalan? Anybody hear about Asqalan? Anybody know something about Asqalan? Where's Asqalan? Let's see, right? Where's Asqalan? Wonder where that is. Anybody know where Asqalan is?
Is it Egypt?
Is it? Where is it? Where's Asqalan, everybody?
Palestine.
In Palestine? Think so? Is it in Palestine? Anybody know where Asqalan is? Where's Asqalan? You see Gaza. Here's Gaza. Here's Asqalan.
Yeah.
Right next to Gaza.
Palestine.
Right next to Gaza. Right next to Gaza. In fact, Gaza was actually considered Asqalan. And the hadith that speak about Asqalan, that actually means Gaza. Okay? That's why I wanted you to wonder, where is it? I went to Asqalan. Very, very, very beautiful city. Very, very beautiful city. Okay? And of course, Israel now calls it Ashkelon, but Fasharu in Palestinian we say. And Asqalan, of course, what Israel is wanting to do is basically take over Gaza in order to annex it with Asqalan, because they had found natural gas resources underneath it. So they basically don't care if people are living there, wipe out all of Gaza and kill all the people there, and basically in order to make a greater Israel. And of course, that's not what they necessarily want to end with, because their plan is way bigger than that. Their plan is to basically even overcome parts of Egypt, and even parts of Lebanon, even parts of Syria, and including Jordan, including Saudi Arabia, believe it or not. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala today, of course, Israel had killed the reporter for Al Jazeera, Anas al-Sharif, in Gaza, and literally targeted his tent. And they know that it was his tent. So this wasn't by mistake, by the way. This isn't by mistake. And the way that they would know is that they would actually have the internet signals. And that's one reason why Israel actually did not turn off the internet signals off Gaza, is because they wanted to get the information and use all the different things that the information that is sent from Gaza. Basically, of course, they would use that as a way to spy on the people of Gaza. So they would know basically the information that is sent, and that information and where it's sent from, and all of that. And that's basically right there. They knew exactly which tent he was in as a reporter, and they targeted because they wanted to silence any way to have the word and the voice of Gaza be heard. So we have to take over and actually speak the voice of justice, speak the voice of the people of Gaza on what's happening. So inshallah, we'll stop right here. I know we passed the time. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Ya Rabbi, يتقبلوا في الشهداء. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept them as part of the shuhada, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Ya Rabbi, not hold us accountable for what's happening in Gaza. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give them victory. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala end the Israeli oppression and end this this Israeli tyranny. Inshallah, Allahumma ameen, Allahumma ameen, Allahumma ameen. So this is it, inshallah. Inshallah, we'll continue tomorrow. Of course, there's a lot more to say, but we'll just stop right here at Asqalan, inshallah, to continue with the rest of the ayat, because there's a lot more to say. Okay, so we'll stop right here, inshallah. Subhanak Allahumma wa bihamdik, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk, nashhadu an la ilaha illa ant. Let's see, this sister here is saying, let's see, if we want peace and stability in the world, we have to have stability and peace. We have to be stable and at peace. And that can only come with Islam and yaqeen. Ahsanti. Very proud of you, Khassatullah. I could see, inshallah, a future scholar, inshallah. Let's see. She wanted us to make the dua. Allahumma ghfir lahu warhamah. وعافه واعف عنه وأكرم نزله ووسع مدخله واغسله بالماء والثلج والبرد ونقه من الخطايا كما ينقى الثوب الأبيض من الدنس وأبدله دارا خيرا من داره وأهلا خيرا من أهله وزوجا خيرا من زوجه وأدخله الجنة وأعذه من عذاب القبر ومن عذاب النار. Allahumma ameen. Allahumma ameen. So this is it. If there are any questions or if there's anybody that would like to say something, I'd be happy to listen, inshallah. I guess, Balqis, go ahead, dear. Walaikum
Yeah.
salam.
I know you've probably answered this many times, but I just wanted to ask, do we really have to be in a state of wudu to read the Quran? So I made wudu to read the Quran,
Okay.
and then
The majority of the scholars actually considered that it's best to be on wudu, but no, you do not have to be on wudu to read the Quran. Why? Because the Prophet ﷺ used to read, Sayyidah Aisha said, the Prophet ﷺ used to read the Quran ala kulli ahayin, in all positions. I didn't mention in another hadith, she basically mentioned that he would read the Quran and the only thing that would prevent him is al-janaba. And even Ibn Hazm had regarded that hadith is not authentic and regarded that even in a state of janaba, ironically, he said that you can even read the Quran even in a state of janaba. So I just want you to take away, I guess, this paranoia. Should I read the Quran if I don't have wudu? Should I not read the Quran even if you don't have wudu, dear?
thank you.
All right.
Yes, thank you.
All right. Rabbi yahfadhku ya Rabbi. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you all. And I'm proud of you all for joining us. And inshallah, spread the word. Inshallah, we'll have more people joining us, and more people, inshallah, will be a part of this gathering in learning the Quran, in learning tafsir, in learning the ilm that we basically have left, that was left from al-Qurtubi, something that basically is a great legacy. Just going back to that ilm and those resources is something that is supposed to keep us determined, consistent, strong, and see the world through the vision and through the lens of Quran and Sunnah. Subhanakallahumma bihamdik, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk, nashhadu an la ilaha illa ant. Sir, sure, we'll talk about the courses. So the fall courses, inshallah, we're going to be having with Dr. Samia, going to be having Muna Rifat as well. And with myself, I'm going to be doing the fiqh of marriage. Fiqh of marriage in details, inshallah. Dr. Samia is going to be doing the 28th juz'u, which is al-Mujadila, and in details, just as she was doing already, Surah al-Juz'u Tabarak and Juz'u Amma. Now she's doing the 28th juz'u. In terms of Muna Rifat, Dr. Muna Rifat is going to be doing akhlaq in Islam. So yeah, check those out, inshallah. So we've got these 3 courses. Inshallah, join us. And tafsir will still be going on. We won't stop tafsir, inshallah, because we have, this commitment to finish all the Quran. Okay, we started at Surah, well, we didn't start at Surah al-Baqarah. We actually started other surahs. It was selective surahs. And right now we're at Surah Al-An'am. So we will still continue until the end of Al-Quran. Alhamdulillah, inshallah, we'll still continue. And as you could see, we'll go in thorough details. We want to learn everything about the Quran. So bi-idhnillah, we'll continue more and more. We already did approximately 11 volumes from Tafseer al-Qurtubi. We did Surah al-Kahf, we did Surah al-Qasas, we did Surah Taha, we did, I believe, al-Ankabut, we did from al-Baqarah all the way until al-An'am right now, until this ayah. And so that makes it a couple surahs right there, and the most important long surahs, especially that they had the most in terms of at least the ayat that relate to legislature. So inshallah, we'll be continuing. So right after Surah Al-An'am, inshallah, we'll be, going into more stories, because Surah Al-A'raf is going to have a lot of stories. So it's going to be a lot faster to complete, but we're not in a rush to complete as much as we are in a rush to understand and fully understand the ayat and fully understand the details of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and what the scholars and what the ulama had basically said about the ayat. We're not in a rush to complete it, but we're in a rush to understand it. We're in a rush to basically comprehend everything in it. That's what we're in a rush for. So, subhanakallah wa bihamdik, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk, ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant. We're ending the live stream first, and then we'll give the chance